Israel's army has been conducting a major operation in the occupied West Bank, deploying tanks there for the first time in 20 years. Since January, it has been carrying out raids on several refugee camps, destroying buildings and infrastructure and displacing tens of thousands of residents. Israel says it is targeting Palestinian militants. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, says the 19 refugee camps in the West Bank house around a quarter of the nearly 1 million refugees in the territory. Some of the camps were established as long ago as 1948 to accommodate Palestinians expelled from their homes when Israel was created. Israel says the camps are a bastion for Palestinian militants and that its so-called Iron Wall operation aims to prevent terror attacks. Many Palestinians have fled the violence to neighboring towns and villages and are struggling to find shelter and supplies. DW's Tanya Kramer reports from Tulkarem.
These people lived here in the Nur Shams refugee camp in Tulkarem. They were forced out when Israel's military carried out raids in the camp. Today they say the army has briefly allowed them to pick up some of their belongings amid widespread destruction. There are among some 40,000 people, the United Nations says, have been displaced in the northern part of the Israeli-occupied West Bank. The Israeli military operation against Palestinian militants within the camps continues, and it is mostly civilians who pay the price.
We are displaced. They forced us to leave our homes. Today we were informed that there are homes that will be demolished. My home will not be one of them, but I wanted to reach it, so I came with the others.
It's incredibly difficult. There's complete destruction inside, with burnt houses and belongings scattered in the streets. No matter how hard I try, I can't find clothes to wear, as we left without any extra clothing.
The two refugee camps around Tulkarem city have housed Palestinians since the displacements of the 1948 war. Over time, they have expanded into densely populated neighborhoods. Israel says the refugee camps are a bastion for Palestinian militants. Although the area is under the control of the Palestinian Authority, Israel's defense minister said the army would continue to operate here for at least a year, and residents would not be allowed to return. The military denies forcibly evicting people from anywhere in the West Bank, which it calls Judea and Samaria. The IDF does not evacuate the population in Judea and Samaria. However, the IDF has allowed local residents who wish to distance themselves from combat areas to leave safely through designated crossings secured by the forces. Aza Kahla is a teacher who was displaced with her family from the Tulkarem refugee camp a few weeks ago. She's volunteering at a soup kitchen to help other displaced people, in particular now that it is Ramadan, which should be the festive season.
I don't know what happened to my home. When a 2-hour window was arranged for us to visit, I went back. But when I stood there, I froze. I didn't know what to do. Everything inside that house is precious to me. Seeing the camp in ruins, the destroyed houses, and the sadness on people's faces, it is the beginning of Ramadan, Ramadan Kareem, and for the first time, we are not at home.
Private initiatives and civil society groups helping the newly displaced can't cope. The Palestinian Authority is struggling financially, and new Israeli laws are affecting the work of UNRWA, the main UN's agency for Palestinian refugees.
The displacement crisis will last for a long time. Even if a solution is reached, thousands of people will struggle to find housing. Many are forced to seek shelter in villages, rural areas, or within the city.
This is where Aza Kahla lives now, sharing the ground floor on the outskirts of Tulkarem with some 40 other family members. She tries to help the children to study. They have been out of formal school for weeks.
Families have been separated. We have lost contact with many neighbors. Our only communication now is through phone calls, even though we were all one family, especially during Ramadan.
Many here have experienced Israeli military incursions into the Palestinian refugee camps for years. But this time, there's no indication of when and how it might end.
Mairav Zonszein is a senior Middle East analyst at the International Crisis Group. She told me what she believes Israel's aims are in the West Bank.
Yeah, so what I was trying to say is that Israel has been de facto annexing the West Bank by building settlements there since 1967. And we've seen an acceleration of that, certainly since this government came into power and since October 7th. But it's not just a de facto annexation. It's actually formally, legally changing the infrastructure of how Israel controls the West Bank through making certain bodies and certain elements of planning and construction subordinate to this finance minister, who is also basically a de facto governor of the West Bank. So what was normally in military hands for security purposes under a temporary military occupation has now become a permanent civilian project. So the threat of formal annexation, as far as Israeli law, is still there. But on the ground, the people who live there, especially Palestinians, they understand that this is Israel already acts as if the West Bank is part of Israel. And so that's something that's important for people to understand.
Now, some observers have accused Israel of a, quote, Gazification of the West Bank. What does that mean? Do you also see parallels with the war against Hamas?
Yes, well, the methods that we've seen, especially since the minute the ceasefire in Gaza took effect, Israel went in for a concerted operation that has been unfolding. It's been using airstrikes a lot more than it has. It's been loosening the rules of engagement in terms of firing on people, and that's why you're also seeing much larger civilian casualties. And in general, the idea is to displace Palestinians. We don't know when they're going to be let back in their homes, making them essentially homeless, which is very similar to what we see in Gaza, and demolishing large numbers of homes. So this is just kind of an infrastructure. A destruction of infrastructure, but if you actually look at the number of militants that are in Jenin, for example, it's around 100 people. It's not that many people. So Israel has been surveilling the West Bank for 50 years. It controls it, and it's still fighting over and over and over again in a pattern where it doesn't seem to achieve its goal of rooting it out. The analysis here is that the same actions, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, are not necessarily going to provide a different result.
Mairav Zonszein there with the International Crisis Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you.